Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? I hereby demand to know how you're doing. It is Monday, May 21st, 2018, and I hereby demand that everybody, repeat after me. That's all I had to say. Monday, May 21st. Yes, Daily Coast Radio is live now, and it's sounding awfully live, as a matter of fact. Bill tweets all the way from Portland, Maine, that Daily Coast Radio is, of course, just underway. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, hereby demands that, and you might want to sit down for this, his list of demands is really, really long. True, I'll never get to the end of it, and if I begin, first of all, let's get rid of this lingering headache. That would be helpful, and, a little more rest. Let's see, I want some time to do more exercise and a healthy diet, and, I'll maybe get rid of the President of the United States before he kills us all. We're back. We survived the weekend once again. Donald Trump did not get out to golf, though Sunday would have been just fine, I think, for a day out at the golf course, but Saturday was kind of lousy, and I think, as predicted, pent-up frustration ending in a tweet. I guess his capper from yesterday was the I hereby demand thing, which was troubling, to say the least. As I recall, he was hereby demanding, and again, there's so much wrong with that tweet. It was really something special, and I guess we'll all talk about it. I didn't really want to bring it back up again because I don't want to remind him that he said this thing yesterday so that he, remembers that he's supposed to do this thing, which will precipitate a constitutional crisis, likely. He said yesterday, after complaining about God knows what and the witch hunt, et cetera, I hereby demand and will do so officially tomorrow. The Department of Justice look into whether or not the FBI/DOJ infiltrated or surveilled the Trump campaign for political purposes, capitalized, by the way, Trump campaign, political purposes, and if any such demands or requests were made by people within the Obama administration, ! And it's problematic on a number of levels, obviously, not the least of which, though I'll begin with it, not the least of which is still has no concept or understanding of the meaning of hereby, which is troubling for an adult. And of course, I am reminded that he previously has misspelled hereby frequently, but I don't know. Apparently, we're supposed to forgive that. Although we were supposed to forgive that he misspelled his wife's name over the weekend, called her Melanie. And sure, maybe that might even be autocorrect. Who knows? But you want to try and get that right. Glad she's out of the hospital, chiefly because that means less traffic coming home for, honestly, probably many hundreds of thousands of commuters who have been inconvenienced all week as sweetheart Donald Trump decided to, it's a nice thing to do. He would have been criticized, obviously, for not visiting her in the hospital. And the weather was terrible, and yes, you can fly back and forth in a helicopter, but he was driving back and forth because the weather was so bad and tying up traffic on the Beltway every night, and I'm glad that's over. And also, great, Melania is out of the hospital, an ancillary benefit, I'm sure. I would say, I hope she's feeling better, I guess. I mean, why not? Doesn't really make much difference in the world, so why not wish somebody the best when they're getting out of the hospital? And, so the bigger problem, of course, that it could precipitate a gigantic constitutional crisis if the president were to order the FBI and DOJ to open an investigation which was not otherwise warranted simply because he told them to do it. And if it comes to that, if he remembers that he said that yesterday, and doesn't chicken out, and he frequently does chicken out when push comes to shove, he could be asking top DOJ officials to open up an investigation that they either outright refuse to do, or worse, they comply and actually open something up and come up with some cockamamie excuse for why it's not simply a political order to do so. And I can easily imagine them saying, well, to be able to dispel any lingering doubts about appearances of bias or whatever, we will go ahead and open one up, and I fully expect it to be closed shortly because nothing actually happened, and I think that's the compromise way out, which is actually quite disastrous in many ways. But because it's quite disastrous in many ways, but not immediately disastrous, expect to see it happen in the Trump administration, specifically like the next day or so. Plus many more things that also likely to end in, if not disaster, then national embarrassment on the list for discussion today. Greg Dworkin has single-handedly fixed all the damage from the recent storms in Connecticut, is exhausted, but here with us today to round things up. Good morning, Greg.
Hey, good morning.
Hi.
I was afraid you were getting used to speaking without anybody interrupting you.
I was, and maybe that's the lingering headache I have.
Yeah, so we got to put a stop to that. Don't worry, I'm here. I'm going to interrupt you all my segment.
Excellent. Begin.
Okay, so let's see.
Wait a minute. Hold on a second. Okay, go on. Just kidding.
Yeah. Oh, yeah? Well, I got this great tweet here. First of all, let's do the Donald Trump tweet from this morning, where he basically repeats word for word whatever Dan Bongino says on Fox and Friends.
Yes. Who is that guy? Is he one of the hosts?
No,
Oh.
he's one of the right-wing blowhards who may have been offered a job, maybe as a lawyer or something, but then decided no, he really can't pass vetting, so he's staying on Fox.
Okay. Well, all right. So he said
The tweet
something
goes
and he retyped.
for a three-tweet trilogy here.
My goodness.
Triptych, right? John Brennan is panicking. He has disgraced himself. He's disgraced the country. He has disgraced the entire intelligence community. This is a direct quote from
disgracing.
He's the one man who's largely responsible for the destruction of Americans' faith in the intelligence community and in some people at the top of the FBI. Brennan started this entire debacle about President Trump. We now know that Brennan had detailed knowledge of the phony dossier. He knows about the dossier. He denies knowledge of the dossier. He briefs the Gang of Eight on the Hill about the dossier, which they then use to start an investigation about Trump. It's that simple. This guy is the genesis of the whole debacle. This was a political hit job. This was not an intelligence investigation. Brennan has disgraced himself. He's worried about staying out of jail. That's a quote, and
sure.
Trump just retweeted that exact quote.
He did he type that? Is that the idea?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's all here.
There's
So I sent
two
you a picture
teeny
at the
little
very
thumbs, huh?
bottom of the lineup here. But yeah, so we have this Mother Jones piece about this stuff from yesterday as well.
Yes.
And the whole idea here is the Trump tweets about witch hunts and ranting. You know, as the walls close in on him, he's getting more and more nervous. And the whole strategy here is to send Rudy Giuliani, who's really not his lawyer, and I'm not even sure is a lawyer, out to the hustings on Fox News and other places that'll have him to talk about the fact that this all comes down to Trump's word versus Jim Comey's word.
Oh, well, that's...
Nothing else matters. The entire case hinges
Okay.
on whether or not Comey or Trump is actually telling the truth.
Well, can I get in on the bet? Can I?
Yeah,
Does
exactly.
anybody have any Bitcoin or a house they want to put up?
You know, why is he even more unhinged than usual? Because there was this huge story in the New York Times over the weekend about the fact that Trump Jr. and others were meeting with UAE and Saudi Arabian nationals trying to influence the election, getting money to put into the election to try to win it for Trump. So Trump looks at this and says, oh, that's some story. You see, they ran out of stuff on Russia, so now they're trying to implicate me with other people. Like that's exculpatory somehow.
Sure. Why not? I wish somebody on this show had been talking about Saudi Arabia and the UAE as alongside Russia, though.
Right. And then the other side of the coin is Qatar, and they're on opposite sides of the fight. Qatar's trying to bribe various and sundry people in the Trump administration, so the story goes, to try to get on their good side. And Saudi Arabia and the UAE are actually bribing Trump people, so the story goes.
I guess so. Qatar's late.
And so it's a battle of money.
Well, that's the language Trump speaks. He is bilingual in well, no, he isn't. I mean, he's illiterate in English, but he's horrible with money. So I don't know exactly what to say, but that's his
And you
second
know who's
language.
to blame for all of this? It's not just John Brennan. You know who else is to blame for this, according to tweets from Trump yesterday?
According to, I don't know, Obama, I guess.
No, Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton, because of all
Nobody
the president
investigated
things she
her.
did.
What about all the money she took? What about? Oh, sounds
If
like a
someone
record
should
here.
have written an article about her during the campaign, I would have read it. I wish I
Apparently
had
they
been
did.
aware.
So whatever happened to the server? Whatever happened to her emails?
Right.
Whatever happened to this? Whatever happened to that? Why aren't the Podesta brothers in jail? What's going on? I can't take it. They're crawling out of my cupboard. They're coming to get me. He sounds
Whatever
like
happened to it, they led
totally-
to you. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Sorry. And I
And
mean
then
in
he
every
goes,
way.
I hereby demand, and will do so officially tomorrow,
Yes, hereby.
that the Department of Justice look into whether or not the FBI DOJ infiltrated or surveilled the Trump campaign for political purposes, and if any such demands or requests were made by people within the Obama administration. Hereby, the word hereby making it official, right? So
Yes,
it's official
I
presidential
did have
policy.
that was clarified for me. Somebody said that makes it legal sounding. Hereby, of course, right? If you hereby make the demand, then you don't have to do it tomorrow. You just did it by that thing that was here.
Jonathan Ladd, who's associate professor of political science
English
at GU, says, I know we're all numb, but for any other president, it would be obvious that this tweet alone is grounds for impeachment and removal, obstructing justice in the investigation of his own campaign and ordering an investigation of a political rival.
Yeah, well, we don't impeach. That's out of the Constitution. That part, like the well-regulated militia, has been read out. Also now emoluments.
So speaking of herebys, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and I want to get this in and make sure I don't forget to talk about it.
Here, buy this hat.
So Matt Glassman tweeted this very funny tweet here. Of course, it's the famous picture of Trump yelling at the kid who's mowing his lawn.
That poor kid, yes.
You know that picture.
I do.
And the quote is, I hereby demand you tell me everything you know about the Koreas.
Well, it's time for him to learn, because I guess...
Well, yeah, it is. So why is that relevant? I got this great thread by Robert E. Kelly. Thought on Moon's meeting with Trump tomorrow.
Oh, what's her name's
today.
father? The daughter. The 5-year-old daughter who came marching in during his interview on Skype. Yeah, I know him as her dad.
Yeah. So thoughts on Moon's meeting with Trump tomorrow. It increasingly looks like the Moon administration overstated North Korea's willingness to deal. Moon will probably get an earful over that. Moon likely exaggerated this to tie Trump to a diplomatic track to prevent him from backsliding into last year's war threats, which scared the daylights out of South Koreans. If Trump were less vain and had allowed his national security staff to vet the North Korean offer, he might have learned this, but instead he accepted the North Korean summit offer 45 minutes after he was told of it without even telling the White House staff, and then drank his own Kool-Aid watching Fox telling him for weeks that he deserved a Nobel. Now comes the hangover.
45 minutes. Wow.
Flattering Trump into diplomacy is also likely why Moon's government credited Trump with driving North Korea to negotiation through maximum pressure and suggested that Trump receive a Nobel Peace Prize. It's an open secret in Korea that this was just flattering Trump to prevent him from starting a war. No one actually believes it. My students and colleagues laugh at the suggestion. No one thought the Western media would actually start seriously debating it. Trump is loathed here.
Oh, guys, you don't know anything about the Western media.
Right? The problem, of course, is that none of this Trump whispering is true. North Korea is not going to denuclearize. North Korea was not driven to negotiate by maximum pressure. They chose to negotiate because they established nuclear deterrence with the U.S. mainland. And Trump does not deserve a Nobel because, well, I'm pretty sure that threatening national genocide at the UN, totally destroy North Korea, is a disqualifier. The great irony, which U.S. conservative media will never admit to, of course, is that Trump actually drove South Korea to the table, not North Korea.
Oh.
Trump scared South Koreans so much last year that Moon's approval rating shot up into the 80s, even though he won with just 41% a year ago, and approval of the summit process is in the 90s. So if you're a North Korea hawk, Trump's rhetoric last year made things worse, not better, by scaring up a dovish consensus for Moon to make concessions and keep Trump at bay. At this point, the best thing to do would be to postpone the summit until greater common ground among the three players can be found, and let experts on the issues hammer out some consensus. You might even say fourth player with China. But Moon likely opposes that because any delay could open political space for Bolton, and Trump likely desperately wants the summit for the TV, attention, a political win he can market at home to change his story about his scandals and blunt a looming blue wave. So the summit will probably still happen, even though, scarily, with 3 weeks to go, nobody really knows how it'll unfold. So that's actually pretty scary.
In some places sort of reassuring in that, like, okay, well, the Koreans really do know that he's an idiot. Okay, that's helpful. But, yeah, the rest of it could be pretty scary.
To basically tell everybody, look, South Korea is lying about Trump because, like, that's what you have to do. Everybody gets that. And it's better than having a war. Everybody gets that because South Korea is going to feel the brunt of it, okay? But
we might have it anyway, for one thing.
We might have it anyway. And the idea that putting this summit on the table as like must have, must do, must complete, must win is awful because that puts the U.S. in an incredibly weak negotiating position. And to make it worse, Lindsey Graham is going around telling people that Trump is telling him he either gets what he wants or he'll force North Korea to get rid of the nuclear weapons. And we all know what that means.
We think we do. I am not totally convinced.
That's bad news.
Yeah, well, almost assuredly, no matter what he does. But I'm not as convinced, I don't think, that Trump feels that the summit is a must-have. I mean, I don't know how you back out of it and save face, but he does do those things. And it will very often say, and he did. He will be right when he says to us, I told you it might happen. It might not happen. We'll see. And it's true. That's exactly what he said at a point at which he should have been much firmer about things. But maybe it's best that he gave himself wiggle room if he remembers and says, we got to hammer a few things out here yet. That would be remarkably mature, and I understand that's why nobody thinks he will do it. But hearkening back to him saying about a major policy initiative that requires, nailing down details and carving them in stone, we'll see. That may end up being his saving grace here.
So he's got Iran on the one hand, which he's done a great job of ruining in terms of a agreement that was working for the purposes it was supposed to do.
Yes. And
then you have to step back and look and say, okay, how can a group of total incompetents who really know nothing about that part of the world somehow pull off a miracle summit that's going to bring world peace and make everything better than if the summit had not happened, while at the same time already giving concessions to North Korea that they got from no other president ever. And you step back and you look at the Western press that has covered this and say, what are they doing? What are they talking about? This is a disaster, and why don't they cover it as such?
I like the fact that the Koreans are now catching on to the idea that, oh my God, the Western press is full of idiots. What are they doing? And another sort of, it reminds me a lot of more of the discussion that we had over the weekend about Comey and why he did what he did following Thursday, Friday's coverage of Crossfire Hurricane. But once again, everybody sort of outsmarted themselves in a way, thinking, what can we do? How do we deal with Trump? And the obvious solution is, the Koreans say, we'll flatter him into this position or that position. And with Trump, who's, not normal, it's easy to have things backfire. All of a sudden, my plan to corner him into something else has resulted in the wrong thing.
You have 2018 there, right?
Yeah.
The only way to deal with Trump is to flatter him. People know that, right? Mm-hmm. Hence our American Western press.
Yeah, I guess so. Except it's not the unforeseen consequences end up being, oh my God, we empowered him to do something much worse. We didn't want him to have a war in A, so we flattered him, and it sort of made him forget about A, but now we're in a war in B.
Mm. So let's look a little bit more close to home. Let's look at Congress. Congress is always fun.
Oh, sure.
It's one of your areas of expertise and one of my areas of interest.
Okay. What have they done?
Well, nothing. That's the point.
Oh, all right.
Oh, but this is a good article here. This is by Rachel Bade. It's in Politico. And it's called Republicans Claw at Each Other Over Farm Bill Implosion.
Oh, yes.
While the Freedom Caucus sank the vote, some GOP lawmakers are blaming Paul Ryan's quest for legacy-making wins. Sure. So to set the stage and to give an idea of where things normally stand here, the Farm Bill is one of those, for decades, bipartisan sort of things. Rural farmers want some help and support so that they don't lose their farm if, a trade war breaks out and soybean prices go into the toilet. But at the same time, urban Democrats really want to make sure that SNAP and food stamps and assistance programs for the needy get dealt with properly. So everybody gets something, and bipartisan bills generally pass with some wrangling about who gets more, who gets less in each individual bill. And that's my summary. You can correct me, but that's my summary of how it worked for decades.
I think that's about right, yeah. I mean, that is true.
So now we have the new Republican majority, which says, no, it's all about ideology. Screw that. What we're going to do is we're going to take those food stamp SNAP provisions, which everybody loves because even our own rural people need them, but we're going to add work requirements. And maybe we'll do it in a way that will finagle it so that, like, white people don't have to have those work requirements. We'll find some workarounds for rural areas so it doesn't really cover them.
Oh, why? They don't work?
Basically, urban area people have to work.
Who lives there?
Well, non-Republicans. Of a certain color. Right? So we'll do that. And Democrats said, that's not happening. You have 0 of our votes on the bill. The Freedom Caucus says, that is brilliant. That means it can only pass with Republican votes. That means we get a say. And you know what our say is? We'll support this bill, but only if you give us what we want. We want the Goodlatte immigration bill, which is going to restrict immigration severely to get a vote, and we want it soon. And so you give us that really super-duper conservative vote. That's our answer to DACA and the Dreamers, because we're sick and tired of wrangling about this. We want to just make it clear that if you're from Norway, you're okay, and otherwise not. Let's pass that conservative fix for immigration, and we'll vote for this bill.
Good.
And Paul Ryan and the leadership said, no. I mean, firstly, what you're proposing cannot pass. If it did pass the House, no way it could pass the Senate. It's impossible. And the Freedom Caucus said, well, wait a minute. That's your excuse for, like, not passing anything. True. You always say that about Trump. You can't pass it, we don't have to do it.
Right.
And in fact, that's why there's the discharge petition with 20 Republicans saying, let's do the moderate version of this, because if it comes to the floor, it will pass, and everybody knows it, and it'll pass the Senate too, and then we'll force Trump to sign it, because he'll sign anything. So stop using him as an excuse, say the moderates. We want moderate immigration reform, and the conservatives are saying that we can't have that. That's ridiculous. We'll hold up the farm bill until you give us what we want. Ryan said, no, that's not a good idea, but this is really a must-pass. I'll tell you what. We will offer you the Goodlatte bill, but not until next month, or maybe a little after that. But I promise you'll get your vote. And the Freedom Caucus said, yeah, no. And Ryan said, well, whatever, let's just take it to the floor. I'm pretty sure it'll pass. And, of course, it failed.
That is pretty astounding. I didn't follow it that closely, but
that's pretty much what happened.
That's great.
Again, you can correct me, and those who are following it even closer than I can correct me. But Ryan brought a bill to the floor that he thought was going to pass, and it didn't.
That seems
And
clear.
It didn't because the Freedom Caucus sank it, and everybody knew beforehand that's what was happening, because that's what Mark Meadows said was going to happen.
That's a tremendous plan, by the way, because when you were describing it, and the Freedom Caucus is saying, oh, that's great, it has to pass with only Republican votes, that means we have a say, and we're not going to pass it unless we get what we want. And I was like, I think I heard your description of the bill very clearly. How is that not what they want? Oh, the answer is they want something on some other bill.
We want to make this a white supremacist country, guys.
Yeah, I mean, so they're really literally going to pass up on those ridiculous work requirements, even as they skew them towards.
We want to go complete full Monty white supremacy.
Well, I mean, I don't know what to guess. I guess next, if they were to put the Farm Bill aside and bring the Goodlatte bill to the floor, would the Freedom Caucus say, no, I'm not going to vote for the Goodlatte bill, not until that that agriculture, the farm bill passes with the other part of the white supremacy.
And would get 40 votes.
I guess they would, but I mean, I'm curious. Like, I've never seen anything quite like that, tying those things together in a way that they shoot down a farm bill that they like. And I guess it's just another one of those things that, or like it used to be that Republicans said, well, we'll do anything to oppose abortion, and then they would never bring a bill like that to the floor. They used to claim, oh, well, it won't pass. And in some years that they claimed that it was true that it wouldn't have passed. And then until the Brace discovered they're just preserving the issue for campaigns.
So here's the best part.
This is really amazing. All right.
So this happens, and Haley Bird writes in the Weekly Standard, a coup in the offing. Top Republicans consider amping up the pressure on Paul Ryan to step down as Speaker of the House before midterm elections, because they figure as a lame duck speaker, he can't get anything done. And by the way, he's not really that good at speakering, which we just saw with this bill.
So,
And so why not get rid of him and have somebody else there who can really push white supremacist conservative stuff? Why not do it now? Why wait? So this whole article here about how Kevin McCarthy especially, who assumes he's going to be the presumed successor, is trying to push Ryan out early. He's just trying to get Trump to agree to it.
What does Trump have to do with it? He doesn't know what's going on. Okay. Well, I guess.
What does Trump have to do with it? He wants the endorsement.
I
so
guess
we'll talk more about that after the break.
Yeah. All right. Well, we got a couple seconds here yet to wrap things up before we do that. I haven't even clicked our music on yet, but it's coming, and that will signal to us that we have 30 seconds to talk our way out. Yeah, you know exactly what's going on. This is an astounding. Well, I would say it was an astounding development if the Farm Bill were, important or worth passing, which in this form it's not. But this is really like, wow. I mean, talk about, it used to be, even in the Gingrich days, that he used to encourage his troops, don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. That was his favorite stupid saying. And, well, I guess they forgot about that one. We'll be back.
I have two words for you, Jim Jordan.
All right. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And in case we got cut off before the break, Greg said that he had 2 words for me. It's a good thing we got cut off. You should have heard those 2 words. But we had a break to come up with the real answer. But you said Jim Jordan.
Jim Jordan.
I was going to say the 2 words he had for me weren't fit for the air.
So here's the thing. Kevin McCarthy is a political animal. Okay, fine. He's in a position to be that. That's what he does. He's a Trump whisperer. But don't forget, Kevin McCarthy didn't become, a majority leader the first time around because he was the one that said on TV, Benghazi wasn't really about trying to find the truth. It was trying to damage Hillary Clinton.
He says so many things that are true.
And, that was a Kinsley gaffe. He said the truth, right? And so that first run for speaker failed. And so now he's thinking, okay, well, why not now? Here's the idea. And it's a great idea, okay? And it's a cunning plan, and it's bound to work.
Yes.
What will happen is Paul Ryan will step down. Whether he wants to or not, we'll force him.
All right.
Then we'll have to have a vote for speaker.
Yes, true.
Who are the Democrats going to vote for?
Democrats are going, presumably would be voting for Nancy Pelosi at this point.
You
but
see
I'm
the
sure
cunning
people...
plan? Then we get to run against each one of these Democrats saying, you voted for Nancy Pelosi, and then we keep our House majority, because running against Nancy Pelosi has worked so well this cycle.
Yes. Also, we already did that. That was, if you check the first vote, I mean, you have that.
But
So
we can highlight it and win with it now, because not telling you why, but we'll just run commercials saying, I'm running against the guy who voted for Nancy Pelosi just last week. Vote for me, because otherwise you'll have Nancy Pelosi as your new speaker.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
that's their plan, to save their majority. And Kevin McCarthy is kind of annoyed that Paul Ryan's not going along with it. And so when you have the vote, then, that'll. But the thing is that Kevin McCarthy isn't going to wind up running, if this happens, unopposed.
Right.
Right? There's other people.
Yes.
And one of the people that wants to run is Jim Jordan, and he'll have the backing of the Freedom Caucus. Steve Scalise may run as well, but Scalise has already said he's not going to run against McCarthy.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay.
But he would if he decides he could win, because that's what politicians do. But imagine Scalise is out of the running for the moment because you actually take him at his word.
I will imagine it.
Okay. Now imagine, all right, so now the Republicans have to have, I guess the entire House has to have a vote for Speaker, because they decide to have the vote whenever they want, right? There's no rules about that? They decide?
No. There is no rule.
Right? They can have it whenever they want.
Yeah,
so
they can
talk Ryan into stepping down.
Well, if there's a vacancy, I think
if they can talk Ryan into stepping down, then they can have the vote now.
Yes.
So McCarthy runs against Jordan. And McCarthy needs to get how many votes to win to be Speaker? I mean, he's got to get a majority, right?
Yeah. Well,
218 or something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think back to it. I mean, it may just be that you can win with a plurality, in fact. But since it's been for so long been nothing but one-on-one Democrat versus Republican for the speakership, and it goes to the side that has the majority, it's always been a majority has elected the speaker, at least recently. But I think you can actually win with a plurality if you split the race.
Okay. So what happens if the race is split because Jordan is running? He gets his 30 votes from the Freedom Caucus.
Yeah.
And what do the rest of the Republicans do, the non-Freedom Caucus people do?
Then that would be a problem, yeah.
And what if the Democrats as a bloc announce they're voting for Paul Ryan?
Oh. Well.
And they get enough Republicans to say that's a good idea. I don't like Jim Jordan. And they elect Ryan. Now Kevin McCarthy is running on the idea that if you elect a Democrat, he'll vote for Nancy Pelosi, except last week he voted for Paul Ryan. But that's not the point.
Yeah.
The point is we have to keep our majority because we do, and it's not logical anyway, and it wasn't going to work to run against Nancy Pelosi. But forget about all of that. Look at her picture. She's a girl. You have to vote for us, and let's go from there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a dumb strategy for a million reasons.
It's a cunning plan.
Right. That's what I mean. Yes, a cunning plan. But for a number of reasons, not the least of which is, well, okay, those of us who would vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker have already done so, and you only need to look at the very first vote from this Congress to nail us with it if you really want to. But you'll also find, of course, that in a election for a speakership, which is usually rigged for, look, the majority party is going to be able to pick the speaker, that's also a free vote for anybody on the other side. Democrats, any Democrat that's worried, that's literally would be scared by this strategy. Ooh, the Republicans will say I voted for Pelosi. We'll just vote for somebody else. Oh.
So here's another example of the difference between McCarthy and Ryan from this Haley Bird article in Weekly Standard. The two hold vastly different opinions about how to approach the DACA debate. Ryan has repeatedly said he wants to find a solution to the issue, including saying he wants a vote on an immigration measure before the election, but McCarthy is far more skeptical about the political benefits of doing so. During a Republican conference meeting last week, he told members if you want to depress GOP voter intensity, this is the number one way to do it. Find a solution that works for the country. That would be depress Republican turnout.
Okay.
Right? So it's talking about the fact that this highlights the difference. But she's got this fun quote here from Kentucky Republican Thomas Massey, starting to get calls about who should be speaker. Mm-hmm. He says, this is the time of year where I get all these area codes I'd never seen before on my phone.
Yeah.
What's happening now is not an actual race for speaker. It's jockeying behind the scenes, the so-called invisible primary, but for speakers. Mm-hmm. And so all of it is just highlighting how weak Paul Ryan is and how weak his position is.
Well, that's clearly the case. So, yeah, well, good. He's on his way out as a lame duck. He was lame the whole time, but if it's highlighted on his way out the door, I can't argue with that. That's fine.
So, you step back and you look and you say, it'd be nice if the Democrats could actually have a opponent in Congress to kind of negotiate with, but it's impossible. And this whole story this whole cunning plan gives you an idea of how impossible it has been and will be to negotiate with Republicans. You don't even know who you're negotiating with.
Yes.
You can't negotiate with Trump because that's useless. You can't negotiate with Ryan because he can't deliver his conference. Mm-hmm. You can't negotiate with Mark Meadows because he's a nutcase.
Yeah.
And so what do? And you can't really negotiate with the moderates in the House because they refuse to break with leadership, even though that really would be the way to get things done, and they know it. And the one time that they might do it is, interestingly, over immigration, which is the hard line for Republican conservatives to dig in on, because they figure that a blue wave is coming, and the only chance that they have to keep their majority, again, it's not a done deal. It's like 55-60% chance, something like that, no better. But they figure, professional politicians that they are, ignoring a artificial tightening in the polls, which isn't really what's going on, and they see the wave coming, and they figure the only way to survive is to be as conservative as possible to get the conservative voters to come out and vote for them, because if conservative voters are unhappy with them, they won't come, and everybody knows the Democrats are going to come, and they are going to show up. And that's what's happened in the specials, and that's why the Democrats have been doing so well. On the whole, they're doing about 13 points better than normal. And they figure the only way to survive is to be as conservative as possible. This is Kevin McCarthy's whole thing here. The only way to keep our majority is to be as conservative as possible and gin up our base. And the best topic to do that with is immigration, because it's like all white supremacy all the time, and like there's nothing to argue about. We can't be wrong.
Well, I guess it's possible to think you can never be wrong, but Kevin McCarthy is an incredible person, just in terms of the things that he says aloud are rather remarkable, and every once in a while it looks like he's grounded in reality, and then the reaction that he has to finding his grounding is totally unrealistic. It's very
all right.
weird.
So 2 more pieces to really highlight this. I always like to tie things together.
Okay.
And I mean, this whole segment was a run up to this. This is a piece by Ron Brownstein in The Atlantic entitled "The Republican Party's Generational Bet." Mm-hmm. The GOP is doubling down on its older white base and hoping the more diverse millennials don't show up to the polls.
Oh.
It's the McCarthy strategy. It's a cunning plan.
I guess. I mean, I don't know.
With examples.
All right. Examples.
Representative Martha McSally, the establishment favorite for the Republican Senate nomination in Arizona, took the unusual step this week of removing her name as a co-sponsor of legislation to provide a path to citizenship for the so-called Dreamers, young people brought to the U.S. illegally by their parents. In other words, she would be one of the swing votes. They need about 5 more votes to get this discharge petition done and bring this thing to the floor. And McSally was a co-sponsor who now won't be voting for it because she's running against Arpaio and Kelly Ward in Arizona.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's an example. McSally's rush to embrace the conservative wish list demonstrates how Trump is steadily tugging more of the GOP toward his nativist positions on immigration, but her move in a state where non-whites will soon represent a majority of the population under 40 also signal how much of the GOP strategy for surviving the midterm election is based on a generational wager. The Republican bet is that the party can mobilize elevated turnout among their older and blue-collar white base without provoking the young and racially diverse voters who personify the emerging next America to show up on Election Day to defend it. Few things are likely to shape November's outcome more than whether that bet pays off. Now, right now, Republicans have reason for optimism. Historically, turnout among young voters plummets during midterms.
Oh, yes. Everything does.
Okay. So, and there's reason to worry based on that. But let me give you a contrasting thing, and that is this other different article in the New York Times. Young people keep marching after Parkland, this time to register to vote. And one of the things about the Parkland movement isn't just pushing Republicans who don't want to vote against the NRA and vote for gun reform in this Congress. It's a vote them out movement. It's recognizing at age 18, at age 19, they recognize you can't just get what you want because you are sensible about it. Their whole thing is register to vote. I'm going to be able to vote when I'm 18. Vote them out. Get new people in there. If you don't want to help, then vote them out. And so you have another shooting, of course, over the weekend, Santa Fe. The response from the olds is, why don't you have less doors on the school?
Right.
The response from the fire marshals is, bang your head against the wall. This is the stupidest idea I ever heard.
Oh, my God. Yes.
And the response from the youngs is, well, why don't we register and vote people like you out because you're really stupid?
Yeah, well, get
and
rid
so
of the door guys.
You may be betting the entire house on the idea that the kids won't show up, but stuff like Parkland suggests they will.
Yeah, well, I hope so. And I mean, this will unfortunately reinforce it. I mean, I guess it is an amazing reality that we're 43 minutes into the show and hadn't mentioned Santa Fe, but that's our news cycle and our numbness at this point to gun news in a way. I mean, it's like a century ago. It happened on Friday. Are you kidding? Donald Trump tweeted in
guy
between.
Sounds like a neo-Nazi. What else is wrong?
Yeah.
Is new.
Right. I mean, it's astounding in its own right. But well, look, I hope that the fervor for registering and turning out to vote can be maintained. It's not that far. They won't be distracted by school for most of that time between now and then. So,
Brownstein concludes, an electorate with fewer younger people and minorities might not threaten Democrats in 2018 quite as much as in previous midterms because college-educated whites will be voting with them.
Yeah.
That's my paraphrase of what he's saying. Yet, Trump has unquestionably struck a powerful chord in older blue-collar, evangelical, and rural white voters who feel threatened by the demographic and economic changes remaking America. As Republican pollster Kristen Soltis Anderson wrote last week in the Weekly Standard, in focus groups I often hear older voters on the right describe millennials as a hostile force trying to take their country away from them.
I believe the children are our future.
It's highly possible Trump will succeed in mobilizing high levels of turnout if the young and diverse voters who not only embrace but embody those changes don't match the intensity. They may again cede control of the country's future to those seeking to restore its past. Now, is that a prediction? I don't know. It sounds to me like covering the bet so that if the blue wave doesn't show, you can point back to this article and say, see, I told you.
We'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. But if there is a reason that the blue wave doesn't happen, that's the reason. It's the same reason that Clinton didn't win a state like Florida, which Armando will tell you. It's that rural white voters turned out in much higher numbers than the experts, including Steve Shale and the other people who really know Florida, thought. They did turn out. Something motivated them to do that. And that's why Kevin McCarthy running for speaker, and that's why keeping immigration reform off the table. That's why not getting anything done. That's why, all this stuff is supposed to help them. Now, you step back and look at the big picture and say, well, but wait a minute. How does not passing a farm bill that helps our constituents, and how does making soybean sales to China plummet, how does that help us? Well, it's all about immigration. It's all about millennials coming to take your America from you. And that should trump everything. Well, I don't know. Will it?
We'll have to see what happens.
We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, well.
But there it is. You got the whole election laid out for you right there. And so how that plays out will determine who wins.
I guess so. That's the way they work. But all right. Well, I don't even know what to say to the
You
plan.
could say, welcome back. I missed you.
I get well, sure, that's absolutely true. I think that goes without saying, and it has for 46 minutes now.
I'm just saying,
Yes, well, I am
glad to have breakfast and enjoy yourself, and
I didn't have breakfast. I was
just like old times.
Yeah,
like
I should have left before and got something to eat, but no, I was enthralled. You see. And I very much miss you. It was a very tough thing to do.
Well, doesn't that all tie it together, though? That's what's happening with the maneuvers by McCarthy et al., and that's why Jim Jordan has a chance in running, and that's why the discharge petition is needed, and that's why leadership says we want immigration reform, but then they tell their conference don't vote for it. That's amazing. What's going on here.
I can't believe that. I can't get my head around how dumb that is. But, I don't know. I'm also one of those people who thought, but Trump's so dumb, no one will vote for him. So, I think by the end that was clear that, oh my gosh, there's a lot of dumb people. They're all over the place. I knew they were. I just thought they stayed home.
Normally they do. This time they voted.
Yeah. I have one question here. What about this Kevin McCarthy Kinsley gaffe that you mentioned?
About Benghazi?
Yes. I recall people saying that. I don't recall his actually saying it, but I remember it being talked about.
It's in the Haley Bird piece.
Okay. We'll take a look there because I did have that comment. The Warlock is pretty sure that he says Kevin McCarthy never said investigation is to damage Clinton, and I guess we have to look at the wording of it. Perhaps there's some argument, or maybe it's Kevin McCarthy's argument. I never said that, but we'll have to see whether, he did.
Well, can I read the quote to you then?
Yes, that would probably be helpful.
Everybody thought Hillary Clinton was unbeatable, right? But we put together a Benghazi special committee, a select committee. What are her numbers today? Her numbers are dropping, McCarthy said on Fox News. Why? Because she's untrustable. But nobody would have known that had we not fought.
Okay. So the literally the words, I did the Benghazi to damage Clinton, were not said. But it's a clear implication.
He said we're proud of what we did because it had this effect.
Okay. I think that probably satisfies everybody, and everybody gets to say, I'm right at that.
And then those remarks were condemned immediately by Republicans involved in the investigation. Funny, that wouldn't happen today, but that's what happened then.
Oh.
That was not the reason we started, said Jason Chaffetz. Remember him?
Jason barely.
Chaffetz? We started because there were 4 dead Americans. It had nothing to do with Clinton.
Yeah, USA. What? We had 4 dead Americans that had nothing to do with Clinton?
Right. And then, on top of his Benghazi gaffe, McCarthy struggled to win the support of conservatives, some of whom are reluctant to support him amid concerns he would not represent enough of a change from the tactics of Speaker Boehner.
All right.
So that's in the Weekly Standard article. That's why I said what I said. At the time, in context,
yes,
it was recognized that McCarthy said something out loud that he should not have, which is that there was some political motivation for the Benghazi stuff.
In fact, yeah, because I know in my own brief search for it, I do have E.J. Dion's piece from that time, I guess late September 2015, and the title of his piece is Kevin McCarthy's Truthful Gaffe on Benghazi. I guess you're not allowed to call it a Kinsley gaffe in the Washington Post.
I guess not. Anyway, that's my segment for today. I left you some other stuff you can deal with if you want to.
What is that stuff? I need it.
Well, how about this piece from Charles P. Pierce about how comically inept Paul Ryan is as Speaker of the House?
Okay, well, I think we heard that.
It's Charles Pierce, so
yeah. Okay, well then that's worth dealing with. We'll take a look at that. Anything else? I'm trying to look through the comments section. He said, okay, so the Warlock's take is on it. He said that the result was that Clinton was damaged, and I think, to me, the implication that was the result he was hoping for in the investigation, and that a lot of Republicans were hoping for, is pretty implicit. But I'm sure he never said, that's why I did the Benghazi. So, okay.
He never said, that's why I did it. He said, this is what happened, and don't you love it?
Yes, and it wouldn't have happened unless we did.
And it wouldn't have happened unless we did it, and we did the work to make it happen. You draw your own conclusions from that.
Yeah. All right. Well, you've drawn one that you and E.J. Dion think that, and
the rest of the world, I think, agree that that's really what happened. All right, I'll leave you with that.
Yes.
But 2 pieces here I've given you. Jen Rubin's piece on Asarian to Paul Ryan's speakership, and Charles P. Pierce. Paul Ryan is an almost comically inept Speaker of the House.
Almost.
Our latest exhibit is the Farm Bill fiasco. The Pierce one obviously is going to be a little more fun, but they both make the point, I think, that Paul Ryan isn't very good at being Speaker.
No, he's not, and luckily that's almost over. Oh, by the way, Dion does in fact mention Michael Kinsley in this piece, so
well,
there is that.
There's that.
At least he got that in there.
All right. There's some other stuff if you want, like pure politics in the pundit roundup today. We got Charlie Cook talking and Mark Blumenthal both talking about why the president's numbers don't move. And they don't move because on the whole, Republicans still support him, but there's aspects of the Republicans, younger voters or women, white-collar women especially, in the suburban areas who really are turned off, and the very much like him versus dislike him numbers are astounding. But as we talked about, and I pointed out this to you the other day looking at a civics graph, Democrats don't change. They're solidly against the president, and they are not budging. So, again, I'll leave you with that, and I'll be back on Wednesday, and we'll see what happens between now and then. Maybe World War III, who knows?
We'll see. It might not.
We'll see.
Yes. Excellent. Well, you know, that is what you used to say all the time, but with less, I don't know. Well, I was going to say maybe with slightly less of a New York accent anyway.
Yeah, well, you know, what happens when you lose your power? You stop talking to the rest of the world and it all comes out. Take care, and I'll talk to you Wednesday.
Thanks very much, Greg. Okay. Glad to have you back. See? And then he left for that part. Okay, well, I'm sure he'll hear that on his way to disconnect the old internet radio. So, yes, plenty to catch up on. And I don't know what else to do with this. The question of what Kevin McCarthy meant, it does seem clear to me, but, you know, I admit to my own biases. I think I share that particular bias with a lot of people on a lot of places on the spectrum. I don't think there are that many people, left or right, that disagree that Kevin McCarthy is a little loose-lipped when it comes to discussing things that are Kinsley gaffes and mistakes to admit to, although sometimes he doesn't admit them in public. They end up becoming public because he's being taped, and that's not really it's not his fault that he's being taped, well, unless he's being taped because he's so horrible and people can't wait to reveal what he says in private. But still, you get what I'm talking about here. And I guess you have to infer this thing. I just don't know what else you would infer from it if it was simply a statement that Hillary Clinton has been damaged, and you also believe that the second-ranking House Republican doesn't have an opinion one way or another about what he thinks about damage having been incurred by Hillary Clinton, then I don't think you're watching closely enough. And I think you're going to have to read something into it. And there's very little else that I could imagine is the case. And otherwise it's a worthless statement. And although I guess I have to admit, if you're saying that Kevin McCarthy makes a lot of worthless statements, I can't say I disagree with that. So I'm torn, let's say. I'm torn between his statements being worthless or politically damaging. And I'll split the baby with you on that one if you like. But I don't think it advances anybody's cause in particular. By the way, just for fun, I thought I'd throw this out there. I mentioned to you that the House can elect a speaker by plurality, which would complicate things enormously in the strategic voting area. But I should caution you that it's extremely unusual to do that. And by which I mean, like, maybe it's happened once, perhaps twice, and not for 150 years, and it required a rules change. But, as I've cautioned you in the past, you should never rule that out, particularly now with these Republicans and the way they operate. Ordinarily, in normal times, and these are not normal times, right, I would caution you, well, they can do this, but it requires a rules change. And that should caution you right away, like, okay, that's highly unlikely, right? Almost impossible. Doable in theory. Maybe it's been done before, but virtually impossible. Even though a rules change in the House, just like in the Senate, to be honest, only requires a majority vote. Now, I guess a more helpful caveat, slightly more helpful caveat, would be that the Speaker is generally elected by majority vote, yes, but you should note that it doesn't require what they call in the Senate side, what they would refer to as a constitutional majority. That is, a majority of the membership chosen and sworn. It's a majority of the votes cast among members present. So, for instance, abstentions could make a difference. Absences could have a difference. So, well, what triggered the whole thing, and it really was a trigger, is when Greg said, well, what do you need for that? A majority, right? 218. Well, okay, that's a majority of the House, a full House, generally speaking, not including the resident commissioner from Puerto Rico, who's probably very busy and has no electric power. No, he's living in D.C., so he's fine. Delegates from the territories. The Republicans generally don't give them a vote on these things, and a vote for Speaker would take place in the House sitting as the House, not constituting the committee of the whole. You know, there's a whole lot of garbage that you could spend a year and a half explaining. I won't. I have in the past. I won't do it again. But yes, you can also elect the Speaker with a mere plurality. And like I said, this was like 1850 that we're talking about. And it was only as a last resort. There was an enormous, like, months-long battle, something you would never see these days with these news cycles that we have. And, of course, television coverage via C-SPAN. The idea of voting, literally hundreds of times to try to come up with a majority vote for Speaker, and only then resorting to changing the rules so that a plurality would do the trick. Not a made-for-TV plot, I would say, and very unlikely to happen. Nobody is likely to have the patience for that this day and age, but it did happen, so if you thought that was wrong, you're wrong. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. If you thought the show was over, you're wrong. See, I went out on the break by telling you were wrong. I don't think that any of you were clinging to the insistence that majority was the only way that a Speaker could be elected. You were probably saying, I didn't know that, and then briefly thought, sure, a plurality can do it. And a plurality can do it. It's just it hardly ever happens. I think it was perhaps just once, and I Googled something real quick during that 1 minute break, and I don't know how much I trust it necessarily, but it's a place to start. It is the insistence here on Quora, which I don't love as a source, but in answer to a similar question about whether or not you can be elected on a plurality. In 1855 and 56, that is to say, the Congress that would have, I guess, back in those days begun sitting, was that still when they began sitting in March as opposed to in January the way they do now? I don't remember when they made that change. That's likely to be the case. So 1850, the elections of 1854, and then people would have come into the House to be seated in 1855. And it says here in this summary that it took them 133 ballots to elect a Speaker of the House, and that was because they kept trying to come up with someone who could win a majority, certainly of the members present, and they couldn't do it. Vote, as it says here in this description, vote after vote was taken, but divisions over slavery, remember that, and the strength of minor parties prevented any majority winner from emerging. Finally, in both cases, it says, it happened in 1849 as well. In 1849, it says the House took 2 weeks to choose its Speaker. I don't know how long the 133 ballots took in 1855, but in both cases, the House voted to change its rules so a candidate with a mere plurality would become Speaker. And in 1856, that plurality winner was elected on the 133rd ballot. Does it say who that Speaker was? Let's take a look. Interesting. A piece from the House historian. The longest and most contentious Speaker election in House history, February 2nd, 1856. I guess that's the day they finalized things, which I guess means that they were sitting in January, not in March. At the conclusion of the longest and most contentious Speaker election in House history, the House elected Representative Nathaniel Banks, congratulations, Mr. Banks of Massachusetts, as its presiding officer for the 34th Congress. Sectional conflict over slavery and a rising anti-immigrant mood. How about that? There's clearly a call for music there. We have one of those now. An anti-immigrant mood in the nation contributed to a poisoned and deteriorating political climate. Sounds familiar. As a sign of the factionalism then existing in the House, also familiar, more than 21 individuals initially vied for the Speaker's post. That does not sound as familiar. When the members first gathered in December 1855, I guess they clearly would have been making their way to Washington early. I'm going to open up the books here for just a second. I'm going to go to the actual books because Googling is less satisfying in some cases than, hold on, I'm coming back, than flipping through the actual books. And I have a gigantic volume that I like to take out from time to time, the Biographical Directory of the United States Congress. But it has summaries by Congress, and I almost opened up directly to the 34th Congress. Here we are. Look at this. So very interesting. As I was mentioning, the initial date of the seating of Congress has changed from time to time, and it has required constitutional amendment along the way. But let's see, the first Congress. Yes, the first Congress, according to the original constitutional dictate, met in March of 1789. But by the, let's see what happened in the second Congress. Yeah, there's a wacky bunch of people here. So the first Congress, first of all, had 3 sessions, not 2. The first session from March of 1789 to September of 1789. A second session from January of 1790 to August of 1790. And a third session from December 1790 to March of 1791. Then it wasn't until, so technically the second Congress was supposed to meet in March of 1791, but they didn't convene their first session until October. How do you like that? Things were just not nailed down in those days. Anyway, by the 34th Congress, their first session. And again, their first session was authorized to meet in March of 1855. And here's why I guess they were referring in the first Quora answer to 1855 and 56, was because though they were authorized to meet as early as March 4th, 1855, the first session, and I guess this is a sign of how contentious things were. If you think things are bad now, Congress did not convene its first session of, again, 3, and it wasn't always 3, but 3 this time, until December of 1855. Just curious. All right. So in the intervening years, there were plenty of times when they simply did 2 sessions. So I don't know what would drive them to change things like that. You could never get a change like that approved now, I wouldn't think. Anyway, so they were supposed to, they were authorized to meet as early as March 4th, 1855, but it took them until December 3rd of 1855 to even convene a session. So they get together in December of 1855, and then it took them 2 months to do these 133 ballots. So now we're into 1856. So imagine that, by the way. You want to talk about contentious times and factions in Congress. Congress is supposed to meet in March 1855. They don't meet until December 1855, and they can't even choose a speaker until February 1856. It's like you're halfway done already with the term of Congress before you even choose a speaker. So I suppose if you were worried about this Congress getting nothing done, I imagine they got a lot less done. So how about that? After 2 months and 133 ballots, the House finally chose Representative Banks by a vote of 103 to 100 over Representative William Aiken of South Carolina. Now, being that it's 1855 and us not knowing all that much about the individual personalities at the time, we probably say, hooray, as progressives, perhaps, hooray, Massachusetts representative over South Carolina representative, because you know the showdown is coming on slavery pretty soon, and the Massachusetts guy, perhaps we could anticipate better on slavery maybe than the South Carolina guy. But Banks was a member of both the Nativist American Know Nothing Party and the Free Soil Party. So a mixed bag at best. And he served, I guess, just one term as Speaker. You might have guessed he might not have been long for this world as Speaker of the House. Before Democrats won control of the chamber, hooray! Except remember what Democrats they were then. They won the control of the Congress in the 35th Congress. Banks retired from the House and served as governor of Massachusetts. It's not like his career was over. He just said, I'll just run for something easy, like governor of the state. The Speaker of the House thing is for the birds. So, I don't know, interesting historical lesson there, to say the least. Let's see. So what else was going on there? Anything else real super interesting that we need to take a look at that? Nathaniel Banks. Wow. Well, we could read a little bit about him one of these days. What a time to be alive. And if you were alive both then and now, you're probably really tired of the whole thing and ready to sign out. And obviously nobody has made it that far. But what an interesting thing. You never know what you're going to find when you crack open the history books. You could do a whole show. It's like there's lots of history and people could spend a lot of time learning it. Wouldn't that be interesting? Think about how many things would go differently if we actually learned from our history. But why do that, I say? All right, let's see. What other things ought we to bring up? I thought that was very helpful. Thanks very much, Greg, for bringing up the Robert Kelly tweet storm on North Korea. It does, in fact, tend to clear things up. Do we? How do we sum up the weekend and what we learned from the Crossfire Hurricane story on forward? We got a lot in on that on Friday, but a lot of time spent digesting this stuff over the weekend, and more stories and hooking in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Iran, Qatar, Yemen somehow got left out of this one. Axis has made for some very interesting developments. And maybe the best way to sum it up that I've found so far this morning anyway, Will Bunch's article in Philly.com. Where does he write for? Is it the Inquirer that he writes for and gets put up online as Philly.com? How the Trump family sold U.S. foreign policy to the highest bidder. Well, okay, that about sums it up. But, you know, we've spoken a bit here on the show about Saudi Arabia and the UAE by extension, since they're pretty much working on the same model. So's Qatar, of course, with a slightly different bent. But some very good observations being made. For instance, I know I saw one earlier today or perhaps late yesterday from none other than Matt Iglesias, just sort of making the very true feeling observation. I wonder if I can find his observation. Just that, here it is. Democratically elected government. So you say, why this affinity for the groups that we've got? Not only Saudi Arabia, UAE, but Russia as well. And what do they all have in common? And I think he sums it up by saying democratically elected governments And this explains why we fall away from our traditional allies in Europe as well. Democratically elected governments have difficulty bribing Trump or ignoring domestic opinion to flatter him. Now, South Korea just managed to do that. And I don't think that Matt Iglesias would necessarily argue that they're not a democratically elected government, though he may have questions about how robust the democracy is. But I don't think he comes down on the side of saying that they're not. Okay, so they may be the exception that proves the rule, or whatever that's supposed to mean. Democratically elected governments have difficulty bribing Trump or ignoring domestic opinion to flatter him, so Trump's pathologies inevitably distance us from traditional allies and draw us toward autocratic regimes. And I guess that holds with respect to the Koreas, in the sense that we are increasing the distance between us and the South Koreans, and instead drawing Trump in many ways towards the autocratic regime in the North. Anyway, it's certainly a mistake to indulge his ego this way. So far, I've seen nothing good come of it. But taking a look at Will Bunch's article here, at least for a place to start, today, by which we mean yesterday, Sunday, May 20th, when he wrote it, marks the 16th anniversary of Donald Trump becoming, the 16-month anniversary of Donald Trump becoming the 45th president of the United States. And nowhere has our unlikeliest commander-in-chief placed a greater stamp on America's place in the world than his dramatic and sometimes arbitrary and capricious, or so it seems, and remember that phrase, please, arbitrary and capricious, shifts in foreign policy. None of these seismic changes seemed more baffling than last spring's abrupt sellout of the Persian Gulf state of Qatar, a longtime ally where the U.S. Air Force Central Command and its 10,000 American troops are now based. We tend to forget to mention that every time Qatar comes up, and that's what made it so astonishing that he would sign on with the blockade. I mean, in a way, the first reaction is, well, but they host 10,000 American troops. Well, they're not going to be affected by the blockade. They bring in all of the supplies that they need, generally speaking, by air, and the Saudis are not about to blockade American ships. Were ships being used to resupply. They're not going to block American warships from accessing the American base in Qatar, but they can blockade everything else. And because Trump is president, he'll say, I don't care. So, yeah, none of these seismic changes seem more baffling than that one. The abrupt sellout of Qatar, a longtime ally where we've had 10,000 troops based. But suddenly, like the remarkable mid-speech policy reversal that occurs in George Orwell's 1984, we were, in a sense, at war with Qatar. We had always been at war with Qatar. Trump stunned his own foreign policy team, including then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, when he tweeted that Qatar is a sponsor of terrorism and seemingly endorsed an economic and political blockade of the tiny oil-rich nation organized and led by two powerful neighbors, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. During my recent trips, this is Donald Trump's tweet about the fact back in June of last year. During my recent trip to the Middle East, remember when he went and got a gold medal and they gave a party for him and let him walk on a red carpet and wave a sword? During my recent trip to the Middle East, I stated that there can no longer be funding of radical ideology, both of which he capitalized. Leaders pointed to Qatar. Look. And that's as vapid a statement as could possibly be made about the subject. How to make sense of a 180-degree shift in policy that seemed so counter to U.S. interests in the region? A few months later, people who suspect the worst about Trump and his minions learned a possible motive was almost too cynical to comprehend. Not long before Team Trump switched gears on Qatar, you know the story, key officials from the emirate had met with Charles Kushner, father of Trump's son-in-law, and senior advisor Jared, who's in charge of Trump's Middle East portfolio, such as it is, to discuss a massive Qatar-funded bailout of 666 Fifth Avenue, the debt-laden Manhattan skyscraper that was threatening to sink the Kushner family real estate empire. But the Qataris rejected the deal. Just weeks before the policy about face. What actually happened, whatever actually happened, the appearance was simply awful. Remember, by the way, when the standard was avoiding the appearance, even the appearance of impropriety. I mean, it was a standard that was violated quite often, but remember when that was the standard. It also seems not to have been the full story. This weekend, the New York Times published a stunning report about a plan floated by a longtime emissary for the Saudis and the UAE in early August of 2016, when Trump had just grabbed the GOP nomination but faced an uphill campaign against Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump Jr., aide Stephen Miller, and Eric Prince, back in the mix here, founder of the notorious mercenary outfit once known as Blackwater and a resident of the UAE. Don't forget all of that. I know a lot of people are talking about, Eric Prince, he's going to get busted for perjury for sure. The guy lives in an armed compound in the UAE, and they're not going to arrest him and send him to us, very likely, and going to pick him up poses problems, even for an administration that wanted him arrested and brought back to the United States, which this one won't. He's pretty well protected in this, I think. So Don Jr., Stephen Miller, Eric Prince listened intently as the emissary offered Team Trump millions of dollars in assistance, including a covert social media campaign to help Trump win that would be run by a former Israeli spy who specializes in psychological warfare, or as Bunch here says, Psy-War, which I thought we called them psy-ops, but I guess maybe now we've switched over to calling them not ops, but wars. Or maybe it just didn't make any sense to say psychological warfare or psy-ops. Well, how's ops warfare? Well, okay, fine. We'll call it psy-war if you can't follow. The emissary, George Nader. You remember this guy. We talked about him a little bit a few months ago, it seems like. It's probably just a couple weeks. George Nader told Donald Trump Jr. that the princes who led Saudi Arabia and the UAE were eager to help his father win election as president, like we heard about the Russians. Some key elements, exactly who was behind the plan and what parts, if any, were carried out, remain murky. But like a lot of Trump scandals, the smoke from any alleged fire was clearly visible. Nader became a Trump ally who met frequently with key players like then National Security Advisor and future felon and international super spy Michael Flynn. He also, according to the Times, made a large payment to the ex-spy Joel Zamel, who got as much as $2 million. After Trump was elected, Eric Prince then attended a then-secret meeting in the Seychelles, believed to have been brokered by the UAE to cement ties with Vladimir Putin's Russia. After Trump became president, American foreign policy has been almost unwaveringly constant, believe it or not, in fighting for the foreign policy goals of nations believed to have supported his 2016 election: Russia, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Most notably, with Trump's rejection of the Iran nuclear deal that is seriously destabilizing the Middle East. These dealings increasingly appear to have benefited the Trumps and Kushners, not just politically, but financially, even as they are not helpful and are even counterproductive at times to the American people whom Trump was allegedly elected to represent. And he's both allegedly elected and allegedly represents us. I would say the Times scoop on Trump's dealings with the Saudis and the UAE is the puzzle piece that finally brings the big picture into focus. As Trump's unlikely 2016 campaign drew closer to the White House, it triggered a mad dash to sell American foreign policy to the highest bidder, and some of the world's worst autocrats stepped up to the plate. What happened next is arguably tantamount to treason, and lots of people will get their backs up about that, but whatever. What is beginning to take shape is the outlines of a scandal that threatens to be worse than Watergate on a massive scale that would make Richard Nixon's crimes look truly like a third-rate burglary in comparison. It's great rhetoric, but about the 9,000th time I've heard that XYZ is worse than Watergate, even though I believe it. A shadowy network of computer hackers in Eastern Europe and experts in Psy-war techniques used illegal methods, including voter suppression aimed at African Americans, to essentially steal a U.S. presidential election decided by a mere 100,000 or so votes in a few key states. Meanwhile, the foreign countries that backed this enterprise and their billionaire allies also found myriad ways to financially support America's new ruling junta, dangling real estate deals, hiring Trump allies, booking big parties at Trump hotels, giving millions to Trump's inauguration that no one can now account for, in ways that have built a bonfire out of the emoluments clause of the U.S. Constitution. And here's the worst part: the sudden trashing of long-standing American policy objectives, like the Iran deal, or delaying any move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem until a true Israel-Palestine peace deal, risks war on a large scale. People could die in the name of keeping 666 Fifth Avenue and the Trump Organization afloat. Arguably, some already are. I mean, I don't know what the argument is. We watched them die on TV the other day. The scope of the Trump-Kushner foreign policy auction is so vast that it would take a whole book to cover, and indeed several have been written, but it helps to break down the outlines of a conspiracy into three simple components. It doesn't really matter what the number is, but I guess he's got three. In each of these areas, the accumulating evidence has grown from a whisper to a scream over the last 2 years. Ready? Let's take a look at his taxonomy here. Part 1, the art of the steal. Very fun to say. Rolls off the tongue. With the GOP nominee behind in the polls for much of 2016, Team Trump seemed willing to listen to offers of help from any and all comers, morality or election laws notwithstanding. In June of 2016, having secured the nomination, Don Jr. gladly convened a Trump Tower confab with Russians who claimed to have dirt on Clinton. It didn't produce any overt deal on collusion because it didn't need to. Just days after Team Putin learned that Trump's people were open to help and wouldn't rat them out to the FBI, a flow of illegally hacked Democratic documents, the 21st century version of breaking and entering at the Watergate, began, and I'm glad he made that parallel. I enjoy that one myself. Now we know that Nader, on behalf of Saudi and UAE princes, came to Trump Tower about 6 weeks later with a similar deal. Oh, you're taking bribes? Excellent. We'd like to get in on the act. We have lots of cash. We don't know to what extent, if any, that the Israeli ex-spy Zamal's firm called Psy Group, whose motto is, quote, shape reality, unquote, helped Trump. But it is well known that Cambridge Analytica, owned by American hedge fund billionaires Robert and Rebecca Mercer, was paid by the Trump campaign to do the same kind of Psy-war work. Just this week, whistleblower Christopher Wiley told the congressional committee that Cambridge Analytica ran a voter suppression effort aimed at convincing blacks to stay home on November 8, 2016, updating Selma for the digital age. Trump's subsequent victory may have been the greatest moment of shaping reality in world history. Part 2, cashing in the chips. Winning the presidency should have been its own reward, but that's not how the childish Gambinos, now in charge of a global superpower, conduct their family business. As noted above, Russian oligarchs tied to Putin funneled millions to the Trump inauguration, and one firm, backed by a pro-Putin billionaire, hired the president's personal lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, who was peddling his access to Trump all around Washington. You also have the curious activities of Nader, a peach of a fellow who's been convicted of both child porn and child sex abuse charges in the past, who helped a key Trump fundraiser, Elliot Broidy, also a convicted felon and recent deputy finance chair of the Republican National Committee, win $200 million in UAE private security contracts. If Broidy's name sounds familiar, he's the guy who also funneled $1.6 million through fixer Cohen to win the silence of a possibly impregnated Playboy model. Broidy said he had an affair with the woman. Some speculate a different scenario. Wink, wink. Donald Trump did it. Whether wheeler dealers like the Nader-linked UAE-funded Broidy were backing high-ranking people in the same fashion that Cohen paid off Trump mistress Stormy Daniels, should be fertile ground for special counsel Robert Mueller. As long as Trump and Jared Kushner continue to hold on to their business holdings while leading U.S. foreign policy, this cloud will remain. Indeed, there's going to be no way to get out from under it. Everything we'll all be speculating about who paid for anything equally dumb that gets done, and really anything even that works out well. We'll be wondering who paid for it. Did Trump voice support last week for ending American sanctions on the Chinese telecom company ZTE Corporation because it would benefit their U.S. subcontractors? Or because a Chinese fund is investing $500 million in an Indonesia theme park that should dramatically boost the value of a related Trump organization development? Good question. We'll have to figure it out. We're not going to be able to do it in the next 2 minutes, but we'll continue talking about it regardless. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, and almost missed my call to get back to the microphone here. Just catching up on a couple of comments and looking for my next article once we get beyond the Will Bunch one, and appreciate comments coming in along the way. Post Festum, who tweets as After the Feast, at After the Feast, if you would like to catch up. I like it. I'm glad to hear this. The occasional stepping away from the microphone to grab a hard copy of the Congressional Biographical Dictionary is exactly why I subscribe via Patreon. And I love the fact that you subscribe via Patreon on top of all of it. But I appreciate the vote of confidence. It does seem like an awfully stupid thing to be doing in the middle of a radio show, but I guess that's not going to happen anywhere else. I mean, find me the other radio show or podcast for that matter that, well, a podcast, they would just pause and say, I'm going to go get the book. And then they would just say these things as if they remembered them off the top of their head. But you get to hear live and in real time that I'm reaching for the Biographical Directory of the United States Congress. And that I have it on the bookshelf here is really sad. But I'm glad you're enjoying it. And I hope that it's one of the more unique features of the show, because I'd hate to think that there were other people listening to other shows doing this. One, you could be listening to ours, and two, what a sad commentary on the state of the world. Well, someone has to do it. It is often said by people who are doing it, I guess. And we'll roll on here with Will Bunch's summation of the developments of, I guess, late Thursday forward with respect to who is where in the campaign and who's bribing who, and how many foreign representatives somehow found themselves meeting with Trump officialdom during the campaign and or transition. So we left off, I believe, by saying, yes, the cloud that now remains over Trump foreign policy, or really any policy, includes things like not being able to figure out whether trying to lift sanctions against ZTE is primarily about helping American contractors who provide parts to ZTE, which is a great excuse and ordinarily works for presidents of the United States, but they ordinarily work because few people are well-founded in their beliefs, should they cling to them, that the moves are made in response to overt bribes or even somewhat shaded bribes from the Chinese government. No one gives anybody the opportunity to make that accusation because nobody hangs on to international investments in the same way as the Trump family. Then, of course, there was the matter of Qatar, because in recent months, Bunch continues, it has become clear that the Gulf state is again in the Trump administration's good graces. Things have been reversed, and the strategic alliance has been renewed as if last spring's blow-up never happened. Is that because it's a more sensible policy? Or is it because a firm called Brookfield Asset Management, that is backed heavily by Qatari funds, is near a deal to bail out Kushner's 666 Fifth Avenue? Is it any wonder that so many longtime key allies of the United States wonder if they can trust Trump's America? Now, that one has a little bit more of a question mark over it because, of course, last week we were cautioning you that at least people like Josh Barrow were pointing out, well, does Qatar really control Brookfield Asset Management? It is hard to make that claim from the outside anyway, based on, say, their 7%, I think he claimed, ownership of Brookfield Asset Management. But that did make them the largest outside shareholder, and that usually counts for something. And sometimes the fact that you control 7% of the company is somewhat deceptive. It sounds like a low percentage, but in reality, it may be all it takes, or maybe the threat of the largest outside shareholder walking away is what it takes. But there's definitely some leverage to be had, even with a low-sounding number like that. But I think we're well covered in questions of where Qatari influence might otherwise be being exercised even outside of Brookfield and 666 Fifth Avenue. There are a number of articles heading into the weekend, as I mentioned, about further contacts between the Qatari government and the campaign, the transition, and early in the Trump administration, including, actually even late in the Trump administration, including the report that I noted from Foreign Policy that Michael Cohen was meeting with Qatari government officials as late as a few days before the FBI raid on his house. Perhaps we could turn to that as a follow-up as well. But first, continuing with Will Bunch's summation, part 3, and remember there were only 3, so we're getting towards the end, the big payback. It's impossible, he says, to dispute that these countries that made offers to help Trump win the election have continuously benefited in terms of policy. Beginning as early as the summer of 2016, when Trump allies changed the GOP election platform to take a less confrontational stance toward Russia in its conflict with Ukraine. The determination not to impose new sanctions on Russia, or under great pressure to announce largely toothless penalties, despite the clear-cut evidence that Russia meddled in our election, has been a continual storyline of the Trump presidency. The revelations about possible Saudi and UAE meddling take things to a much higher level. The Trump administration has walked in lockstep with the Saudis and their dynamic de facto leader, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, supporting the young prince's so-called reform agenda that's involved jailing and abusing his enemies, as well as, some people say, torturing them, as well as advocates for women's rights. 2017's move on Qatar and his brutal military campaign in Yemen, there's Yemen, which has caused massive civilian casualties. People are dying because of policy decisions that are tainted by Trump corruption, and it may be getting worse. The anti-Iran agenda of the Saudis, UAE, and Israel, which has close personal and business ties with Kushner, has hovered over Trump's killing of the Iran nuclear deal, which not only makes it more likely that Iran will get the bomb more quickly, but has dramatically ratcheted up tensions in the powder keg region. It should never have gotten to this point. The political pundits are still busy debating whether Trump impeachment is a good fall political strategy for the Democrats or a losing hand. But things have already moved way beyond that. If we're at the point where we can tolerate soliciting foreign governments for help in a presidential election using stolen data, reality-bending psychological warfare, and voter suppression of blacks to win, A president and his son-in-law's senior advisor profiting from deals while sitting in the White House, slush funds to pay off mistresses and God knows what else, and then making life or death decisions based on all these utterly corrupt things, then the United States isn't a country anymore. How much worse does the political scandal in American history have to get how much worse does the worst political scandal have to get before the people who can actually do something wake up and do that something? And the answer is it will never happen with these guys, and that's why you're supposed to get out and vote and change the composition of Congress. But don't tell anybody why we're doing it. Go ahead. Go ahead. You have my permission. All right. Quick follow-up, I hope, with the foreign policy article that I just briefly mentioned, just to keep things up to date on who's meeting with who, when, and where. Elias Grohl and Sharon Weinberger reporting for Foreign Policy here. I'll see if the full body of the article is available. Trump lawyer, sort of, that's Michael Cohen, met with Qatari government official days before FBI raid. Was Michael Cohen seeking to add foreign governments as clients of his consulting business? Was he up to something else? No one knows. Or at least no one's telling. President Donald Trump's personal lawyer, which he really isn't, who made millions over the past 18 months soliciting funds from clients seeking entree and influence at the White House, met with a senior Qatari official in Florida last month. In Florida, eh? Just days before the FBI raided Cohen's home and office, according to two sources familiar with the matter. The sources would not say what was discussed at the meeting with Qatar's Minister of Economy and Commerce, Ahmed bin Jassim bin Mohammed Al Thani. But the Washington Post reported this week that Cohen had offered his services to a different Qatari official. That's a nice way of saying it, offered his services. At a meeting in December of 2016, promising access to the White House in exchange for $1 million. The Qatari turned down the offer at the time, according to the report. The meeting last month took place on the sidelines of the glitzy Qatar U.S. Economic Forum in Miami. Because that's where you got to have economic forums, right? The gathering brought together U.S. investors and Qatari businessmen for talks on joint projects and promoted investment opportunities tied to the 2022 World Cup. Don't forget, that's happening there, I guess. Wow. It also attracted lobbyists looking to sign up Qatar as a client. That'll be slushy. A Qatari embassy spokesman said Cohen requested the meeting with Al Thani but would not say if it took place. The state of Qatar has never been a client of Mr. Cohen, the spokesman said. Well, they weren't named in court, so they're safe so far. Cohen's attorney, Stephen Ryan, did not respond to repeated requests for comment on the meeting. After Trump was elected U.S. president in 2016, did you know he was president of the U.S.? No, it's foreign policy, so they have to point this out, I guess. Cohen pitched himself as a consultant to companies looking for insight into the operations of the White House. He landed several big-name clients, including telecom giant AT&T, Swiss pharmaceutical company Novartis, and an investment firm linked to a Russian billionaire recently sanctioned by the U.S. government, and also a Korean food subsidiary somewhere along the line. It's crazy. The FBI is investigating Cohen for possible bank fraud and campaign finance violations. His trip to Miami is likely to raise questions about whether he was seeking to expand his consulting business to foreign governments. Cohen's pitch to multinational companies touted his access to Trump and his unique understanding of the administration's key players. Advocacy groups have questioned whether this consulting work fell afoul of American lobbying laws, including whether Cohen should have registered as a foreign agent, although that's probably the least interesting of the bunch. There is a bit more. Let's take a look. Qatar has in recent months hired teams of lobbyists and public relations consultants in the U.S. to win White House support for the lifting of a blockade on the resource-rich emirate imposed by its adversaries in the region, including Saudi Arabia. They've done an awful lot to bring people into a favorable view of them, says Gerald Firestein, a former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia and the director for Gulf Affairs and Government Relations at the Middle East Institute, a Washington think tank. Qatari state-backed investors have pledged to inject $45 billion into the U.S. economy including in possible infrastructure projects prized by the Trump administration. Investors linked to Qatar have also eyed investments in Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner's family real estate company. The New York Times reported on Thursday that a Canadian real estate company backed by the Qatar Investment Authority is close to a deal that would bail out a financially troubled Kushner-owned office tower on Fifth Avenue in New York. Are they Canadian? Is that Brookfield? During the presidential transition, Cohen discussed infrastructure projects with Ahmed al-Rumaihi, remember him? The Qatari executive from whom he solicited the $1 million payment. According to The Intercept, Cohen told al-Rumaihi that he would require the fee before offering his advice on infrastructure projects in which the Qataris should invest. And he was probably qualified in that respect. Cohen could say, well, these are the favorites of Mr. Trump, and you'll get more mileage for your money by sponsoring these things than, I don't know, almost anything else. The Miami Forum kicked off a 4-city tour that brought Qatari officials and businessmen to South Carolina, North Carolina, and Washington, D.C. That is a very concentrated tour. The tour coincided with a high-level visit of Qatari officials to Washington that included an Oval Office meeting between Qatari ruler Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, another Al Thani, and Trump, which, by the way, gives you, again, a pretty good insight into what's happening in the UAE and in Qatar. We said Qatar was operating on largely the same model, and that would tend to prove that assertion. The the finance minister being an Al Thani and the ruler of the country being an Al Thani as well. At the meeting, Trump praised his counterpart as a partner in combating terrorist financing, even though he earlier said they were the problem in terrorist financing. The comment seemed to conflict with Trump's previous description, there we go, of Qatar as a funder of terrorism at a very high level. On the other hand, another one of those trademarked moments, he's not wrong. Whether he says that about Saudish or the Qataris, they are both allies and funders of terrorism at the same time, because things are complex there and we don't really grasp it, I don't think. According to a person who attended the Miami Forum, Cohen sat in on at least one roundtable discussion. The forum included a large Qatari government delegation and private businessmen from the Gulf state interested in investing in U.S. real estate, the hospitality industry, and sports franchises. And boy, do they love the sports franchises in the Qatar situation. Big Three basketball, for instance, and many other things. They sponsor a lot of soccer teams, and you've seen it all over the place if you are an international soccer fan. Okay, there's a lot to it. In a switching of the gears, a ritual switching of the gears, to the gun side of the ledger, which, again, we haven't paid much attention to yet today because, I mean, everything that needed to be said got said largely over the weekend. I have nothing to add, really, with respect to the actual shooting that took place in Texas. And you may recall, if you were listening on Friday, the earliest reports were coming in at that point, and we're like, all we knew was a shooting had taken place, and we didn't know what sort of shooting, or the sort of shooting that it was is an interesting topic all by itself. And there's some confusion about that. And there's been some really good observations made by others, and we've noted them along the way about some really strange and disturbing patterns that present themselves in a number of these types of shootings. And this one, I think, really brought it out in high contrast. I did see a lot of people, chiefly women, tweeting over the weekend about their observation that later breaking reports about what the hell was going on in Santa Fe in this shooting, noting correctly, I mean, it's factual, but more valuably, I guess is really what I'm trying to say, noting that the headlines were about, mass shooting at a school. Once again, sort of fitting into the pattern of the school shooting and the setting taking precedence over a detail of the shooting that I find would have gotten more prominent play had fewer people been shot. It's a weird dynamic that we have going on here, where, and it's narrative seeking, and the fact that it took place in the school, and we have these battles between gun safety / control advocates and gun enthusiasts / nuts on the other side over even what constitutes a school shooting. They fight over, this is the 22nd school shooting of the year. No, it isn't. By another count I read, it's only the 16th. And obviously it's like there's countries that have none, so maybe we could talk about that. But that's not a distraction. It's part of the debate. How do you count? Should you be counting? What does the counting mean? And but that's a side fight all by itself. What I think is interesting is, and what these women were pointing out in particular, was that sort of buried in the stories after another school shooting and 10 people killed, and what are we going to do when we should get rid of doors or more doors, or everybody brings their own door to school, or everybody arms the teachers, and all the familiar debates. Down in, I don't know what paragraph it was buried in, but people noting, among the, so how the shooting actually happens is the gun child, goes into, I guess, the art room, an art class, where I gather that he was I don't know whether he was an art student himself, but he knew who was in the art class. And he began there. And it was, this horrible scenario in which he walks in with a rifle and says, surprise, and starts shooting people. Although it was variously reported early on Friday as a rifle and a shotgun, but apparently it was a long gun of some kind. And I don't think we're talking about an AR-15 in this case. Possibly a shotgun and a pistol, both stolen from his dad, who I guess didn't secure them, or at least not very well, and that's a separate issue as well. But among the first people shot in there is, I think, the key to the whole thing. He shot, and at first, again, early reports described as his girlfriend, and then later described as ex-girlfriend, and then clarified as, no, I don't think they were going out at all. He was simply chasing after her and harassing her to go out with him, and she wasn't interested, and he felt rejected and spurned, so he showed up to kill her. And while he was there, I guess he figured he'd kill some other people he doesn't like very much in that art class as well. And there was some notes in some other articles about him very pointedly sparing others in the classroom and elsewhere that he encountered people whom he did like. So it was one of these things that it's interesting how, if you're the kind of person that wants to, for whatever your motivation is, to minimize the number of quote unquote school shootings, they differentiate between like randomized school shootings, show up and shoot as many people as possible, for no good reason. And I guess here they're thinking about the Sandy Hook style of shooting where, the shooter isn't a student at this school, but his mother had worked at the school, and I don't know if that was the motivation. No one could tell with this particular case, I guess. But it's not his school. He wasn't settling scores with the students there. Versus other shootings where, if it happens, particularly if it happens in an African-American neighborhood, and it's a shooting between rivals, and if you can even come close to plausibly describing either one of them as the member of a gang, then it's the sort of thing that people say, oh, that's not really a school shooting. It happened in a school, but it was going to happen anyway, whether it happened in a local store or out on the street or at a corner somewhere or as a drive-by. And people tend to dismiss that because they're biased on the guns, perhaps racist as well, just for fun. And I don't know. And they have a real interest in somehow turning this into something other than a school shooting. And only 1 or 2 people got shot, so it's no big deal anyway. But you shoot 10, then it fits into the narrative of randomized school shooting, but it really isn't one. And isn't there something terrible going on here? And are we back on the terrible subject of, if not necessarily the incels, then just certainly, as they say, toxic masculinity? Isn't that perhaps what's going on here? And I saw a couple of very interesting tweet storms on the subject, and I don't know if I can dig that one up in time here, but I'll have to scroll back a ways to like Saturday, if I can find the tweet storm. And it's an important one, and I feel like I should. But let me also tell you that I've got an article here that I have a feeling as I scroll and I'm looking, we're not going to get all the way through. But, I've scrolled back to Friday here, and now I don't know if I can find it. Oh, maybe if I look under tweets and replies, that'll find it. But in the meantime, I'll tell you about, you'll never guess who's brought it up again and who's made our news feed again. Teen Vogue, once again, scoring a victory in cracking into our regular news feed, which ordinarily would perhaps not be the case. And I'm stalling here because I really do want to find this other tweet storm here because it's an important one, mostly because it reflects the fact that, regular, ordinary people and fairly young people at that are noticing this as well. And I guess it's taking the young women to be the ones to call this out. As I recall, we're talking about a Twitter friend's 9th grade daughter making this observation. Here we are. I finally found it. And Dana, who sent this one on to the rest of the world, including me, from Mike Caulfield, who tweets, if Dana says, Mike's identified the pattern, read the whole thread so the specifics sink in, and we all know one of the underpinnings to so many of these mass shootings, and Mike is pretty clear in saying, the pattern really comes from the observations of my daughter. What's the pattern with these shootings? I just can't see it, he says, tongue in cheek, with a couple of screen grabs. This one about the latest one in Santa Fe, one of the shooter's classmates who died in the attack, Shayna Fisher, quote, had 4 months of problems from this boy. Her mother, Sadie Rodriguez, wrote in a private message to the Los Angeles Times on Facebook. He kept making advances on her, and she repeatedly told him no. The shooter continued to get more aggressive, and she finally stood up to him and embarrassed him in class, Rodriguez says. A week later, he opens fire on everyone he didn't like, she wrote, Shayna being the first one. Rodriguez didn't say how she knew her daughter was the first victim, but what if she was the second? I don't think it would make a big deal. Next observation from a previous shooting, and here I guess I might have to go with names without about the shooter just to help distinguish between which incident it was. Victoria Olvera, a 17-year-old student, said Cruz was expelled last year. This would be Parkland, yes, because he got into a fight with his ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend. She said he had been abusive to his girlfriend. A former friend, Dakota Muchler, said he hadn't seen him in more than a year after his expulsion, before which, quote, he started progressively getting a little more weird. Another observation from a previous incident, quote, but what appears to be the driving force behind the largest mass shooting in Texas history is rooted in an awful simplicity. Authorities say Devin Patrick Kelly wanted revenge on the lover who scorned him. According to law enforcement officials, he targeted the Sutherland Springs Church because of, quote, a domestic situation going on within the family and the in-laws, according to the Washington Post, whom Kelly had previously threatened in text messages and phone calls, and who reportedly worshipped at First Baptist. Among the dead in Sutherland Springs, the grandmother of his second wife. There's more, and I can't even get through the tweet storm side of it, but it connects the Virginia Tech shooting to the same problem. It connects, of course, Elliot Rodger and Santa Barbara shootings to the same problem. It connects a mass shooting in one of the older ones in Killeen, Texas. Are we talking about, it might be like, that's the Luby Cafeteria mass shooting. I mean, we're really going way back in time, but there's a number of them. And I'm not done, and I won't be done anytime soon with the tweet storm. That we have to kind of abandon, but I also will bring to your attention the Teen Vogue piece. Teen dating violence is an indicator of gun violence. We need to pay attention writes Lily Herman, putting together, no doubt, a somewhat more comprehensive study, or rather, probably reflective study in all this. But before I exit from this, Mike Caulfield lets everybody know, to be fair, it was my 9th grade daughter who showed me just how tight this link was. She went through all the school shootings since Columbine for a report for school, and at the end of it, she was like, why do people keep saying it's mental illness when it's toxic masculinity? It was a solo project of hers, and I'm not sure the class appreciated just how many dozens of hours she put into it. But at the end, she walked me through it. Not just misogyny, but rejection by the military and a few other things, cluster of things, and none of it was mental illness per se. She also handmade an amazing animation, which he shares, along with, for anybody else who's read through the entirety of the tweet storm, a very important observation, a great one, and getting more and more attention, like Frederick Douglass, I guess, as things go on. Certainly an important observation, and one we need to keep bringing up, even in the face of all the other things that are happening, most of which will be summed up by Justice Putnam next.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Yeah, thank God Justice will sum all this stuff up for you. Trump's on the warpath with Amazon again, leaning on the post office directly to double the rates for Amazon shipping. I don't know if that's going to work, but it will precipitate another crisis. What else? The RNC has paid over $500,000 for Hope Hicks's legal fees. We'll find out why, plus more, next.